I do nature photography for a living, and a few years back I got hired to document the wolf population in the Carpathian mountains of northern Romania. I'd worked in remote areas before, but this was different. The isolation there is on another level entirely. I hired a local guide who knew the terrain and spoke the language. Before we headed out, he told me we needed to be careful out there. I assumed he meant the wolves, maybe bears. I didn't find out until later what he actually meant. We loaded up the truck with enough supplies for a week plus 2 extra days as a buffer. The plan was to drive as far as the roads would take us, then hike deep into the mountains where the wolves actually lived. You're not going to find them near any towns or villages. The first day we hiked about 12 miles. It was manageable terrain, mostly just covering distance. I knew once we hit the rougher areas deeper in, our pace would drop significantly. We made camp that night without incident. Day 2 is when we started seeing wolf sign, scat, old kill sites, and tracks in the mud. We only covered about 8 miles that day because the terrain got rougher, and we were stopping frequently to check for more signs. By evening, I felt confident we were close enough to where I could spend the next few days getting good shots. Because of the wolves, we decided to sleep in shifts and keep the fire going all night. When my turn came, I was on edge. I'm used to being in the woods, that's literally my job. But I hadn't been that isolated in years. No cell service, no roads, and nothing but mountains and forest for miles in every direction. About 30 minutes into my watch, I started hearing something that didn't fit. Footsteps. Not the long strides of deer, or the cautious stalking one of wolves. They were confident and slow. Whatever it was circled our camp, staying just outside the reach of the firelight. I didn't react. I didn't want whoever or whatever was out there to know I noticed them yet. After about an hour, they got bolder. They moved closer, and I caught a glimpse of a human silhouette barely past the trees. That was too close. I called out, asking in English who was there. I figured they'd identify themselves, or at least say something. Instead, the figure bolted. I heard them crashing through the brush as they ran off into the darkness. I tried to wake my guide, but he was completely out. I mean, dead asleep, to the point where I actually checked to make sure he was still breathing. I stayed up the rest of the night. The guide woke up on his own when the sun hit him. Over breakfast, I told him what had happened. He got this look on his face and said he'd been worried about that. He explained that there are hermits living out in those mountains. Usually they're harmless, he said, but you should still be careful. They're known to steal supplies, sometimes worse, but not usually. Then he mentioned the smugglers, said those are the ones you need to really worry about, but you probably won't see them before they kill you. He added that smuggling has died down a lot in recent years, so the chances of running into them were slim. Still, something to watch out for, though. None of this made me feel any better. I had thousands of dollars worth of camera equipment with me. If something got stolen, the whole job would be scrapped, and we were already 2 days deep into wilderness. We spent that day tracking the wolves, and by midday we found a pack. I got some incredible shots, probably some of the best work I've done. Towards evening, we hiked a few miles away to put some distance between us and the pack before making camp. My plan was to try for a few more shots the next day, then start heading back in the afternoon. I wanted to take my time on the return trip and photograph other subjects in the mountains to round out the project. That night, the sounds came back. I couldn't tell if it was the same person or someone different, but it seemed unlikely that 2 hermits would live close to each other. The whole point of being a hermit is isolation. This time I never saw them. They stayed more cautious. But there was a new sound. Rocks knocking together, echoing through the dark. I didn't mention it to the guide in the morning. We simply ate and headed out to find the wolf pack again. While walking through the woods not far from camp, I spotted something strange. A pile of stones stacked with something sticking out from the top. I called the guide over. He took one look and told me we had to leave, right then. I didn't understand. I asked him why. He explained that the stones marked the hermit's territory, and the thing sticking out was a piece of cloth dipped in blood to turn it red. White cloth is a warning. Red cloth is a threat. The hermit wanted us gone, and this was his way of making that clear. I asked why we should be afraid of one person. The guide insisted if I wanted to make it back, I needed to follow him, because he was leaving immediately with or without me. On the hike back, he elaborated a bit more. He said he'd been trying not to scare me earlier, because he wasn't sure how the hermit would react. But the hermit had let me see him on purpose that first night. That was his way of saying this was his space. When we didn't leave, he escalated. The guide was certain that if we stayed another night, we'd be killed in our sleep, even with someone on watch. Despite the rough terrain, we made better time leaving than we had coming in. The guide wasn't messing around. We must have covered 12 miles that day. That night, during my watch, the sounds returned worse than before. Something was moving through the branches above the camp, circling us constantly, staying right outside the firelight. It went on, and my nerves were completely shot. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore, and I yelled out into the darkness in the broken Romanian I'd picked up. I barely knew a few words, but I managed something like, "Okay, we understand. We're going." The noises stopped immediately. The rest of the night was silent. The next morning, we found animal skulls arranged all around our camp. Deer, goat, and what looked like a dog. We packed up and moved, just as fast as the day before. The guide used his satellite phone to arrange a pickup for the following morning when we'd reach the road. There were no sounds that last night, but I could have sworn I saw a figure crouch near a bush while I was on watch. Just a shadow, perfectly still, and watching us in complete silence. We got picked up the next morning without incident. Fortunately, I was able to sell the wolf photos I'd managed to get, so the trip wasn't a total loss financially. But it's the strangest and most unsettling experience I've ever had in the field. I've been face to face with a bear before, and that was scary in the moment. But being systematically stalked and hunted by something with that level of intelligence was different. It got under my skin in a way nothing else has. I still do remote photography work, but I haven't been back to the Carpathians, and I don't think I will. This happened to me when I was a brand new Boy Scout. I was 11, small for my age, and still trying to figure out how to tie anything other than a simple square knot. It was a 3-day weekend, Labor Day 1995, and our troop of 8 boys was heading out for a serious multi-day backpacking trip. The goal was to knock out a bunch of merit badge requirements, orienteering, forestry, things like that. I was the youngest. We had 5 other guys who were 12 and 13, mostly goofballs but decent kids. Then there were the 2 older boys, Ben, the assistant patrol leader, who was 15 and already driving a beat-up Ford Ranger, and Mark, the patrol leader, 16 and taking the whole thing very seriously. Our scoutmaster, Mr. Henderson, was in his 50s, a retired mechanic, burly and one of those guys who always seemed to know exactly what kind of tree you were looking at. The assistant scoutmaster was Mr. Davis, the father of one of the 12-year-olds. He was in his 30s, volunteered only because the rules said we needed 2 adults, and freely admitted he didn't know a spruce from a Douglas fir. He was a nice man, though. The first day was textbook. We hiked in about 5 miles, set up camp perfectly, and spent the afternoon learning, Mr. Henderson had us identifying plants and practicing orienteering with maps and compasses. He was a good teacher, and even Mr. Davis managed to boil some water without burning anything. That night, after some truly terrible fire-cooked chili, we were all sacked out, the woods quiet around us. The trouble started the next afternoon. We'd broken camp and were hiking off trail to practice finding specific landmarks. We hit a small rocky creek that we needed to cross. Mr. Henderson stopped us on the bank and had one of the 12-year-olds, Mike, take out the map to locate our exact position. Mike was holding the map, the kind of heavy, crinkly paper map that costs about $20, trying to match the winding creek line to the blue thread on the paper. That's when it happened. A sudden, sharp gust of wind came whipping down the creek bed. One of those unexpected little mountain winds. It snatched the map right out of Mike's hand before he could even tighten his grip. The wind didn't just drop it, it fluttered it out over the middle of the creek, and it landed flat on the water. It was moving so fast downstream, bobbing between the rocks, that it was gone around the bend before Mr. Henderson could take 2 steps towards it. Mike was mortified, absolutely ready to cry. Mr. Henderson, bless his heart, put on a big reassuring smile. He told Mike not to worry, that these things happen, and that he always carried a backup map in his pack. Relief washed over the whole troop. He unclipped his main pack, dug through the top flap, and then the main compartment. His expression slowly dissolving from jovial confidence to a tight grimace. He finally looked up and announced that he must have left the map back on the kitchen table. Okay, deep breath, no big deal. We still had the compass. We were practicing with that too. We moved on, focusing on bearing and pacing, and the anxiety started to fade. Maybe 45 minutes later, we were struggling up a tricky loose gravel incline. Andy, one of the 13-year-olds, was holding the compass, the good heavy-duty metal one. He stumbled on a patch of loose shale, and the compass went flying, tumbling end over end, and hit a boulder with a sickening crack. The clear, liquid-filled case was shattered, and the needle spun wildly. Permanently dislodged, it was completely useless. This time, Mr. Henderson's reassurance was noticeably strained. He told us that we didn't need a map or a compass. We had the sun. He knew there was a fire road, a big wide gravel access road a few miles due east, maybe a bit north. He said if we stuck to an easterly bearing, keeping the sun on our right shoulders as we walked, we'd hit it quickly, and from there it was a fast walk back to the cars. The rest of the afternoon was just a miserable non-stop trudge through the trees. The sun was always shifting, the terrain was always changing, and there was no fire road, only dense, identical woods. We kept walking, kept hoping, and as the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long spooky shadows, we all knew we were lost. That night was chaotic. The younger boys, including myself, were whispering, convinced a bear was going to eat us, or that we'd wander off a cliff. The older boys, Ben and Mark, tried to keep order, but the stress was getting to them as well, and they were shouting at the younger ones to shut up. Mr. Henderson and Mr. Davis were doing their best to sound calm, but their voices were tight. It was right after sundown when they finally managed to get us all quieted down. They just told us to go to sleep. In all the confusion and exhaustion, they completely forgot to put the food away properly. When we woke up the next morning, our packs and the food bags we'd left near the fire had been completely ripped open. Raccoons, maybe a clever bear, and every other hungry critter had been through it. The food stores were a disaster. There were only a couple of bruised apples and some granola bars left for breakfast. We started walking eastward again, hungry and scared. By noon, the inevitable happened. The adults cracked. Mr. Henderson was still insisting that the fire road had to be right around the next ridge. Mr. Davis, hands on his hips, was yelling that we had to stay put, make a big smoke fire and wait for rescue. They were standing maybe 10 feet away from us, yelling at each other in these low, guttural, angry voices. Us kids just stood there, watching the two people who were supposed to be completely in control completely lose it. The sound of their fighting, muffled by the pines but still clear, was scarier than the idea of a bear or being lost. It destroyed the young kid notion that adults always knew what to do. Mark, the patrol leader, stepped up and suggested a compromise. He said he and Ben, the assistant, would go as lookouts, scouts literally, and try to find the road. They'd leave a clear trail of broken branches so they could find their way back. Mr. Henderson agreed, but he insisted on going with them. He told Mr. Davis to stay put with the rest of us. He even gave him a copy of the First Aid Merit Badge book and told him to keep the boys busy, keep their minds off things. So we were making a very sad, tiny fire, watching Mr. Davis nervously flip through the first aid book, when 13-year-old Andy looked up at a distant hill, a distinct shape with a triple-peaked pine on top. He said something like, "Isn't that the same hill we walked around yesterday afternoon?" Mr. Davis looked again, and a slow, terrifying realization dawned on him. Andy was right. We'd been walking a massive, hour-long circle, and if we followed the sun, we were just going to head back the way we came. We had probably passed the same creek, the same oddly shaped rock 3 times already. Mr. Henderson, Ben, and Mark didn't get back until just before nightfall. They hadn't found the road. Mr. Davis quietly told Mr. Henderson about the hill and the realization that their easterly bearing was actually circular. Mr. Henderson looked defeated, but he agreed. They packed us up in the dark, and we started hiking back the other way, using our flashlights to guide us. We pushed on for hours, exhausted and barely speaking. We got a few hours of sleep, and the next morning we were back on the trail by sunrise. It was maybe an hour later, just as the sun was starting to get warm, that we walked right into a wide, gravel fire road. The one the scoutmaster had been looking for. It hadn't been east. It was behind us the whole time. We were back at the cars before noon. The scoutmaster and assistant scoutmaster shook hands, apologized to each other, and made up right there next to the trucks. Later, Mr. Henderson made sure every single one of us got the merit badges he could reasonably sign off on. My parents, and I think most of the other parents, were just relieved we made it back. The 90s were a different time. There were no cell phones, no frantic rescue searches that I remember. And since we were all fine, everyone kind of chalked it up to a good learning experience. I can laugh at it now. The story of the map, the compass, the raccoons, and the endless circle. But back then, when I was 11, the moment I saw those 2 grown men, the leaders, the ones who were supposed to be safe and wise, yelling at each other deep in the woods, it was absolutely the scariest thing. It was the moment I realized that sometimes, in a crisis, the person in charge is just as lost as you are. I don't really tell the story much because it sounds fake when I say it out loud, but it happened about 3 years ago when my wife and I were in a really rough spot. We'd been living in our car for about 2 months at that point, bouncing between parking lots and side streets, trying to stay under the radar. It wears you down after a while, the constant worry about where you can park without someone knocking on your window at 3 a.m. or getting a ticket you can't afford to pay. One day, we just needed a break from it all. The constant traffic noise, the people, and the feeling of being watched. My wife suggested we head out to the National Forest about 20 minutes outside of town. We'd passed the entrance a dozen times and figured we could find a quiet spot, maybe pretend things were normal for a day or two, and cook over our fire like we were actually camping instead of just surviving. We drove down the main road until we found a dirt trail that looked manageable. Our sedan wasn't exactly built for off-roading, but the path was worn enough that we figured others had done it before. We went maybe 3 miles in before we found a decent clearing and parked. It felt good to be that far from everything. No street lights, no engine sounds, just trees and quiet. That evening, we made a small fire and cooked up some ramen noodles. We managed to grab some eggs and carrots from a food bank earlier that week, and my wife insisted we add them to the noodles. Even when we had basically nothing, she was always trying to make sure we ate something halfway nutritious. I gave her grief about it sometimes, but honestly, it was one of the things that kept me from completely losing it during those months. She always has a way of showing she cares. We put out the fire before getting into the car to sleep. We'd gotten pretty good at arranging our stuff so we could both fit kind of comfortably in the back seat. I was just starting to drift off when I heard it, a girl scream cutting through the darkness. My wife, she grabs my arm immediately. I could feel her whole body tense up. The scream came again, and it wasn't far away, maybe a couple 100 yards through the trees. My wife started whispering about how we needed to leave right then and there. She was coming up with these theories about cults doing sacrifices or clandestine human trafficking. Her mind goes to worst-case scenarios when she's scared, and I couldn't exactly blame her. Hearing a girl screaming in the middle of nowhere is outright terrifying. But I kept thinking, what if someone actually needed help? What if we left and something horrible happened that we could have prevented? I told her we should at least check it out and see what was going on. She didn't like it, but she grabbed her flashlight and came with me. We headed in the direction the screams had come from, trying to be quiet about it. After a couple of minutes, I could see firelight through the trees. Then more screaming, but it sounded different now, angry instead of scared. We got closer and saw it was a group of teenagers, maybe 5 or 6 of them, sitting around a fire with beer cans scattered everywhere. 2 girls were right up in each other's faces yelling. We hung back and watched, not really sure what to do. Apparently it was about some guy. One girl kept screaming that the other one was a backstabbing bitch, and the other one was yelling right back. We figured it would blow over in a minute and we could just head back to our car. But then, one girl shoved the other one hard enough that she went down. The girl who did the pushing stood over her and hit her across the face. Then she turned around to walk back to the fire like she was done. The girl on the ground was fumbling with something in her jacket pocket. That's when I saw it catch the firelight. It was clearly a knife. I didn't even think. I just started running toward them, yelling at her not to do it, to put it down. All the teenagers whipped around and stared at this random man charging out of the dark woods. Everyone froze for a second, but the girl on the ground was getting up, and I could see her looking between me and the other girl who had hit her, trying to decide who she wanted to go after. I kept yelling that she had a knife, and finally a couple of the guys there seemed to understand. They moved toward her, but she was already lunging at the other girl. She missed by maybe a foot. The guys tried to grab her, but she twisted away, and then she came at me. I turned and ran. I'm not proud of it, but I wasn't about to get stabbed by some drunk teenager in the woods. I heard her footsteps behind me, and then a thud as she tripped over something. By the time I looked back, the 2 guys had her on the ground and were wrestling the knife away. She was still fighting them even after they had gotten it, screaming and kicking. I went back over and helped them hold her until she finally wore herself out. I told one of them to call the police, but he said he was calling her dad instead. I didn't argue. About an hour later, this guy in a pickup truck showed up. He looked exhausted and angry and embarrassed all at once. I explained what had happened while his daughter sat on the ground glaring at everyone. He thanked me, apologized probably a dozen times, and asked if I'd press charges. I said no. I didn't see a point in it. He loaded his daughter into the truck and that was it. Or so I thought. 2 days later, we ran into each other down at the Walmart parking lot where we'd started staying. Turns out he owned a construction company and offered me a job on the spot. said anyone willing to run toward trouble instead of away from it was someone he wanted on his crew. I started the following Monday. The daughter ended up getting community service for the drinking and assault. I don't think the dad mentioned the knife to the cops, and none of the other kids filed reports. She was a minor, and I think he wanted to handle the knife part within the family. That job changed everything for us. We were able to save up enough for a deposit on an apartment within 2 months. I worked construction for about a year, then decided to go back to school. I'm finishing up my nursing degree now. My wife is doing better too. We don't talk about the car living days much, but sometimes when I'm studying late at night, I think about how different things could have gone if we'd just driven away when we heard those screams. The whole thing still feels surreal. We went into those woods to escape our problems for a couple of days, and somehow came out with a new path forward. I've read a lot of survival stories that sound like action movies, but the reality of being lost and injured in the woods is a lot more pathetic and quiet than people think. It's mostly just cold, wet, and incredibly lonely. This happened in late May a few years back, in the Black Hills of South Dakota. If you've never been, it's beautiful country, thick pines, deep gulches, and granite spires. I was on a solo 4-day trek. I'd heard the storm warnings on the radio before I lost signal, but I was sticking to the lower elevations, and the sky directly above me was that perfect pale prairie blue. I figured the heavy stuff was hitting the higher peaks miles away. I thought I was being smart and it would completely miss me. About 2 days in, I found this perfect spot. It was a wide, shallow gully with a stream that was barely ankle deep. The water was crystal clear and cold. I was tired, my boots were heavy, and the air was getting humid, so I decided to take a long break. I stripped off my boots and socks and sat on a flat rock right in the middle of the stream, just letting the water numb my feet. It felt amazing. After a while, I moved about 20 feet back from the bank to a large pine tree that offered some decent shade. I leaned against my pack, intending to just close my eyes for a minute while my feet dried off. I started coming out of the nap to a strange sensation. It was a sudden, sharp chill on my toes. I jerked awake, totally disorientated. I expected to see the grass, but instead I saw brown, churning water swirling around my ankles. My brain didn't register it at first. I looked up the gully and saw a tangle of pine branches and gray foam bobbing toward me. That's when the sound hit. A low, heavy rumble that sounded more like a freight train than water. Found out later there had been a massive cell further up, and all that runoff was hitting my specific gully at once. I scrambled to my feet, but I was barefoot and the ground was already becoming a slick slurry of mud. I reached for my pack, but a surge of water caught the bottom of it and yanked it away like it weighed nothing. Within seconds, the water was at my knees. I tried to wade toward the higher slope of the ravine, but the force was incredible. It felt like someone had tied a rope around my waist and was pulling me downstream. I lost my footing. 1 second I was upright, and the next I was underwater. The panic was instantaneous and total, and I was blindly thrashing in desperation. My backpack, which I'd managed to get one arm through in the initial scramble, was now a lead weight. It was waterlogged and snagging on submerged debris, dragging my shoulders under. I felt the strap choking me. I remember thinking, quite clearly, that I was going to drown in 2 feet of water because of a North Face bag. I managed to shuck the straps off, losing the bag entirely. I came up for air, gasping and swallowing a mouthful of silt, only to be slammed sideways. My back hit a submerged rock with a crack that rattled my skull. The world went gray around the edges. I felt a weirdly peaceful sensation of floating, but then my face hit the cold air again, snapping me out of it. I saw a large root hanging off the side of the ravine wall where the bank was eroded. I lunged for it and the water tried to tear me away, its weight pressing against my chest, but I held on until my fingers felt like they were going to snap. Slowly, inch by inch, I dragged my body out of the main current and onto the muddy bank. I lay there for a long time heaving. I was soaked, my boots and pack were gone, and the adrenaline was starting to wear off, replaced by a dull, throbbing ache in my back and ribs. I knew the general direction of my base camp. If I hiked away from the water and kept the afternoon sun to my left, I should eventually hit the main trail. But walking barefoot in the Black Hills isn't like walking on a beach. It's all pine needles and sharp rocks. I managed to find my socks snagged in some brush about 50 yards downstream, but they were full of silt. I put them on anyway, thinking some protection was better than none, but that was a mistake. I never did see my pack again. By the second hour of walking, my feet were shredded. The wet fabric of the socks and silt acted like sandpaper against my skin. I could feel the blisters forming, big hot welts on my heels and the balls of my feet. Every step felt like stepping on a lit cigarette. As the sun went down, the temperature plummeted. I had no way to make a fire. I wasn't some survivalist. I didn't know how to rub two sticks together. I spent the night huddled under a low-hanging spruce, shaking so violently that my muscles hurt the next morning. I didn't sleep. I just drifted in and out of a shivering stupor, listening to the wind and the distant sound of the receding water. By sunrise, I was in bad shape. I hadn't had anything to eat or drink since the morning before. I was severely dehydrated. My tongue felt like a piece of dry leather, and the hunger was a sharp cramp in my stomach. The blisters on my feet had popped and then rubbed raw again. It was torturous. I had walked 10 feet, cry in pain, and have to lean against a tree. After a few more hours of dragging myself through the brush, I realized I didn't recognize any of the landmarks. The flood had carried me much further downstream than I'd estimated. I was lost. I sat down on a log and realized I couldn't go much further. I started to yell. I didn't have the energy for help, so I just made a long rhythmic wailing sound. I did it for what felt like hours, my voice cracking and turning into a dry rasp. I was about to give up and just lie down when I heard it, a faint human whistle. I called out again, putting everything I had left into it. About 20 minutes later, a man and a woman appeared through the trees. They looked like something out of a dream. Clean gear, bright clothes, and the look of horror on their faces when they saw me. I must have looked like a corpse. I was covered in dried mud, my clothes were torn, and I was limping heavily. They were incredibly calm. The man approached me slowly and asked if I was okay, though the answer was obvious. He immediately got a bottle of water out of his side pocket and told me to take small sips so I wouldn't get sick. He explained that they were out for a day hike and were only a mile or so from the trailhead. While the woman sat with me and gave me a protein bar, which tasted like the best thing I'd ever had, the man pulled out his phone. He told me he was calling the Rangers and that everything was going to be fine. He had to explain our location to the dispatcher, giving coordinates from his GPS app. They stayed with me, literally helping me limp back toward the camp area, until we met a couple of Rangers with a litter. I ended up spending 2 days in the hospital in Rapid City. I had a mild concussion, several deep lacerations that needed stitches, and my feet were a mess of infection and raw skin. The doctors told me that if I'd spend one more night out there without water, the kidney failure would have started. I still love the outdoors. I still go back to the Black Hills every summer, but I don't go alone anymore. It's a strange feeling knowing how quickly the woods can turn from a sanctuary into a grave.
You have been watching Neon Noir, a Radeon production brought to you by Spoopy Cola.